Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as we welcome the presidential candidate of the APNU+AFC Coalition. Thank you. Please continue standing as we have Ms. Riel Stewart doing the national anthem for us.
Dear land of Guyana, of rivers and plains, made rich by the sunshine and lush by the rains, set gem-like and fair between mountains and sea, your children salute you, dear land of the free, dear land of Guyana. To you will we give our homage, our service, each day that we live. Love you, great mother, and take us to be more worthy our heritage, land of the free.
Thank you, Riel. And now it's time for the national pledge. I pledge myself to honor always the flag of Guyana and to be loyal to my country, to be obedient to the laws of Guyana, to love my fellow citizens, and to dedicate my energies towards the happiness and prosperity of Guyana. Thank you. You be seated. Presidential candidate of the APNU Coalition, Brigadier David Granger, Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, His Worship, the Mayor of Georgetown, the Honorable Hamilton Green, representatives of international organizations, Mr. Derwin Humphrey, moderator of tonight's forum, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first of two forums designed as part of the civic education component of the Guyana Women Roundtable and the Guyana National Youth Council. Civic education comes in many forms. In 2011, Marundo Incorporated held at this very venue the candidate and the electorate. At that forum, the public was invited to question the presidential candidates on their policies for a better Guyana. This evening, women and youth have the opportunity to get answers to issues of concern to them. So it is my pleasure to ask Mr. Murphy David, member of the Guyana National Youth Council, followed by Dr. Dawn Stewart, convener of the Guyana Women Roundtable, to share the background to this evening's candidate issue forum. Mr. Murphy.
Good evening, buenas noches, boa noite. The Honorable Brigadier David A. Granger, presidential candidate of the coalition party APNU+AFC, and his wife, ladies and gentlemen, students, well-wishers, the media, all, I must bid you a warm welcome. The Guyana National Youth Council, an organization headed mainly by youths, mainly headed by youths, and in a nutshell, the collective voice of all youths. The council advocates for youth rights at all levels. It is created by youths for all youths. We are proud to say that the council have been getting tremendous support from NGOs, private entities, individuals, and other organizations, which includes Blue Caps, Habitat for Humanity Guyana, Marundo Incorporated, SASOD, SPLASH, the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, the Guyanese Women Roundtable, University of Guyana Students Association, Youth Movement, Youth Media, among others. The Council started the Vote Like a Boss campaign to remind youths of their rights and to have a say in determining the future and who leads us all. With a focus on youth education and why it is important that youth exercise their rights to an opinion as we gear up for the 2015 national and regional elections. I must say that youths, we are all the future of this country, and with my voice I must say that all voices of the youth matters. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to you, Brigadier General David Granger, members of the APNU+AFC, members of the Diplomatic Corps, our partners, team members, and youth audience, and the voters. On behalf of CPIC Monique, Helping Hands Support Center, and the many women we serve, I bid you a fond welcome. At Monique's, we treasure our commitment to educating and empowering women with the skills needed to be involved in civic participation through the Guyana's Women Roundtable. Guyana Women's Roundtable is an intergenerational, non-partisan civic engagement network coordinated through Monique's Soca the Vote initiative on women civic participation. At the forefront of championing just and equitable policies on behalf of women, GWR promotes the health and wellness, economic security, education, global empowerment as key elements for success. GWR seeks to bring together women representing diverse views and interests within the Guyanese community around the theme of women's advancement, with a particular focus on motivating women to engage in all levels of the civil society. Through public policy forums, leadership training, and civic engagement and issue education campaigns, GWR provides women with a voice and skill training to use the political process to improve the quality of life for themselves and their communities. Our program includes outcome-based projects to increase civic engagement, base building, and vote empowerment for women, education on political process, leadership development, and preparation of young women interested in playing a role in the political process, and last but not least, engagement of women in policy discussion to ensure significant impact of women voters in the political process. This issue forum is one of many tools by GWR to involve the women of Guyana in the process of civil engagement. It also gives the women the opportunity to have a first-hand discussion with the candidates of the 2015 election cycle themselves on the issues that you have said to us are extremely important to you. Therefore, I welcome you all and look forward to a fruitful exchange of information which will assist you in making informed decisions during this election process. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart and Murphy. Mr. Murphy. Okay, just before I introduce the moderator, I want you to give a special round of applause for our representative from the AFC, Mrs. Cathy Hughes, who is very, very knowledgeable on women and youth issues. And we ask her to take the stage with the APNU representative. So we have the true coalition on stage. I must apologize for the absence of Mr. Moses Nagamutu. As we move on in the program, I'd like to introduce to you the person who will be taking us through tonight's proceedings. He is Mr. Derwin Humphrey, is the Project Operations Manager at Maroondah Incorporated. He received his BA in International Relations as well as a post-grad diploma in Development Studies from the University of Guyana. He recently completed his MBA and he's also studied project leadership at Cornell University. He has extensive experience in professional training, particularly for volunteers, staff, and youth. He has participated in the 2013 and 2015 International Debate Best Practices Symposia in Washington, organized by the National Democratic Institute and the Commission on Presidential Debates, and represents Guyana on the Caribbean Regional Network for Debates. So please give a round of applause to the man who is, I'll hand the proceedings to, Mr. Derwin Humphrey. Over to you, Derwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening to the candidates, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's forum is obviously not a debate, so the rules will differ slightly from a debate. This forum will more closely resemble a town hall format, with the candidates seated. Questions will be asked by the moderator, yours truly, as well as members of the audience when invited. Please note that members of the audience will be randomly invited to ask questions and have not been pre-selected. Please note that members of the audience will be given a chance to ask questions at 2 microphones specifically placed. The microphone to the center in the aisle will be used for those who have questions on women's issues. The microphone to my left will be used for those who have questions on youth issues. Issues tonight will focus specifically in these 2 areas. In many cases, these issues will overlap. Members of the audience, you're encouraged to make your questions very brief and to the point. Now here are the rules. All mobile phones should either be switched off or placed on silent at this time. Each question will last a total of 3 minutes. 1 minute maximum to ask the question, and 2 minutes maximum for each candidate to answer. Please note that if candidates wish to share responses to the questions, this is welcome. However, the same time limit applies. Now, if I am to ask a follow-up question, you have a maximum of 1 minute to respond. The time limit you will be given shortly for your opening statements will be a maximum of 3 minutes. Let me pause to explain what this highly technical piece of device that you see on the stage tonight is. This actually is very simple. It's a 3-light system, not exactly technical but very effective. The 3 lights will guide our timing tonight. The red light, let me start with the green. The green light will illuminate when the candidate begins his or her response. The yellow light will illuminate when there's 30 seconds remaining. And the red light will illuminate when your time has concluded. Candidates will make closing statements for a maximum of 2 minutes each. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, that questions must pertain to issues. All candidates will be given an opportunity to respond. Questions have been vetted by an impartial team and have not been shared with the candidates beforehand. Duplicate or related questions have been combined. There will be no insulting, condescending, or insidious comments or questions by members of the audience. If this occurs, we will unfortunately ask you to leave. The audience will be asked to respectfully refrain from excessive exuberance, and that includes clapping, excessive clapping, cheering, booing, jeering, etc., for or against the candidate. The moderator's ruling is final in the distribution of questions. Now, these are the 5 areas that we will focus on tonight. And these areas were jointly chosen by the 2 organizations involved today: teenage pregnancy, job creation, healthcare reform, education reform, and violence against women and youth. Now, candidates, you are strongly encouraged to be as specific as possible when answering the questions. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, the candidates here tonight represent the APNU+AFC coalition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again the presidential candidate of APNU+AFC, Brigadier David Granger. And we expected to have Mr. Nagamutu tonight, but I guess this may be a future prime ministerial candidate for the coalition. Please welcome Mrs. Cathy Hughes. Welcome to you both. Now, with an eye on the timing device, Mr. Granger will first deliver his opening statements, followed by Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Granger. And you have 3 minutes. You can, if you want to stand, you can. If you want to sit, you can. It's up to you. Just before you begin, Mr. Granger, I'm sorry to do this, but PMM 3326, you're blocking the driveway. Please move your vehicle. Please proceed, Mr. Granger.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Moderator, thank you for your introduction and announcing the brevity of my presentation. I'd like to congratulate the Guyana Women's Roundtable and the GNYC on mounting this very important event this evening. To be realistic, in examining women and youth issues, we need to look at several factors before we deal with the agenda which has been announced. To my mind, the most important is poverty. And without dealing with the question of poverty, we will not be able to realistically deal with some of the other issues which have been mentioned. I had the experience a few months ago of meeting in Maikoni a young mother of 14. She wasn't 14 years old. She had 14 children. And she could not afford to send them to school. So there's no point speaking about education, speaking about nutrition, speaking about other domestic problems unless you deal with the fact that there are many mothers who simply cannot afford to bring up their children, cannot afford to provide for what is required in the household. So poverty has to be at the basis of APNU+AFC's approach to dealing with issues affecting women and youth. The second issue is the issue of education. We have in this country, after 23 years of PPP government, about 600 dropouts every year from our primary and secondary schools. This is unsustainable. It means that many of the children who drop out of school cannot read, write, count, or spell properly. And it makes them unsuitable for future employment. And this creates, of course, a problem for job seeking. And of course, the next issue that I'd like to deal with is the fact that women and young people who are not properly educated or fully educated end up with the worst jobs. They're menial, they're the lowest paying, perhaps the hardest working, and perhaps the most difficult to get. So unemployment is chronic and endemic among school dropouts in all 10 regions of the country. And many women suffer most. Many of them are being sucked into positions as security guards, cleaners, domestics, and other low-paying jobs. The next issue I'd like to examine in dealing with youth and young and women is, of course, the problem of the cost of living. The taxation regime in this country is oppressive, particularly to single parents, to women who have to run households. And there's the red light. And when we come to deal with health, of course, we know the problems of maternal mortality, we know the problems of domestic violence, which impact most heavily on women and young girls. All of us must be astonished, disappointed, outraged to hear about another young woman's body being dragged up on the foreshore. And it means that this is not a health issue, this is a criminal issue, a security issue. So these are some of the concerns that I feel impact most on women and young people in Guyana. And unless we deal with them, unless we have a government after the 11th of May which deals with these issues, we will continue to have the type of society we have now, a very unsafe society, a very unhappy society, where many young people choose to commit suicide rather than face the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure, Mrs. Hughes, if you prepared a statement. If so, please proceed to the microphone.
Good evening. Talk about being put in a hot seat. I hope you guys saw the very kind lady that stepped up to me literally 10 minutes ago and said, would you come up and sit in this seat? So I just want you to know that I literally was asked about 5 minutes, 10 minutes ago to stand up and share a few thoughts. The position of women in our country is very important to my party, so I will take up the challenge. Our presidential candidate has given you an idea of some of the areas of concern, and I think what I can do is probably share with you some of the plans and the things that we would like to implement should we be elected into government. In the area of economic empowerment, we started off hearing about poverty, but to the alliance, to the coalition, economic empowerment is something that we need to do. And therefore, one of the things we want to focus on is putting in place an increase in tax credits for employers, and also for employers that can be encouraged to provide daycare facilities. So when it comes to the tax system, we're saying that, look, for large employers, we want to be able to put a facility where a woman does not have to worry about the care of her children. We've done some research and it shows that a lot of women actually at 3 o'clock are trying to work out how they're moving from their job to sneak out, to collect children, to drop them at a friend, an uncle, a cousin, a grandparent. So facilitating and encouraging tax credits for the establishment of daycare facilities, and also tax credits for employers, for individuals that are working with you, that you can get a rebate for the women that are employed with you. One of the areas we also want to look at is increasing microcredit financing. That is extremely important. We still have a very archaic banking facility. And I know that because just a couple of months ago I went to the bank to borrow a very small amount of money. And it literally took me 3 months of providing all kinds of information, everything you could possibly imagine, just to get a loan. So our banking system is still not friendly enough and supportive enough to women. We want to remember that women in research data all across the world, it shows that women, when they borrow money for their own businesses, for enterprise, they have the highest repayment schedules. So we want to encourage. This is where we think that the diplomatic community, in terms of international organizations that can help to finance, and also locally putting more things in place with our banks. A very important area is the area of domestic violence. And it's sad that within the last couple of months, years I should say, very little has been done. We want to implement what you would call almost like a special victims unit at the police stations. We want to make sure that when a woman goes to report an incident of domestic violence, and also when she has been raped or any kind of situation of violence, there's a special unit funded with the requisite social workers, psychologists that can deal with the situation and can provide some solution. And I see the red light is on, so I must stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the candidates. And now we move into the question segment. What I will do is ask one person with a youth question, one person with a question about women's issues to take the microphone at this time. One person each. And I will begin with a question, and we will each alternate those questions. So I will ask the first question, and then we will come around to women's issues, then youth issues, and then back to the moderator. All right. Now let me just let the audience know that these questions were received via email, the email address that was largely published in the press. And we've received quite a few questions. And as I said, we have merged those that were duplicate. Our first question says, "Good day, sir," and I'd like to say, "Madam. I live in the Cummingsburg area. We have lots of problems when the rain falls. We have 3 schools in the area, and one is in Thomas Street, very close to Church Street. What can we do about flooding in our city, especially to avoid children missing school, and also to ensure that the area is kept clean? Thanks, and I want to make my vote count for my area." Yes. Yes, it's okay there. Just press it once. That's good. Just press it once. That's good. It's on. It's on.
It's hard to see for these lights.
What can we do? We need to elect a government which will hold local government elections. We need to elect a government which respects the democratically elected municipal government, that is the Georgetown City Council, so that they can be properly funded and keep the drains clear and relieve flooding during periods of heavy rainfall. We need to elect a government which respects local democracy and does not obstruct the work of municipal and neighborhood councils. Throughout Guyana, we've had the present government uprooting democratically elected neighborhood democratic councils. So the problem of flooding is not a Georgetown problem. It's not a Cummingsburg problem. On the very day, I think last November, when we had flooding in Georgetown, I was in Anna Regina, and Anna Regina market was being flooded. The Minister of Local Government was blaming the Mayor of Georgetown. I wondered how far the Mayor of Georgetown could extend his reach to flood Anna Regina market as well. There is a local government problem in this country, and it will not be solved until the PPP is removed.
Thank you for staying well within the time. Do we have any question from relating to the women's issue? If not, I'm going to move on. If you have a question, please approach the microphone. Women's issue in the center, women's issues in the center, youth issues on the left. And please ensure that we are sticking to the issues. Yes, sir.
Good evening, prospective presidential waiting in the aspect of the leader of the APNU+AFC coalition and Ms. Cathy Hughes, representative of the AFC. My name is Mr. Arnold Christiani. I'm an ex-captain of the Guyana Joint Services back in the 70s and 80s. And I've seen the excellence of people learning to cohabit and working in easy inconsistency. This is a British policy that I learned as I studied human relations back in those years. I was the quartermaster of the Guyana National Service, an organization that focused all its resources on the youth. The question, therefore, concerned with any aspect of neglect or inefficiency or combative behavior among women in relation to domestic violence or any other form of social unrest has got to do with how we bring about people to cohabit in a meaningful and positive way. So I would want to hear from both candidates what kind of program, specifically, or organization is intent to bring about that realization. Thank you.
All right.
You want me to talk about cohabiting, huh? We have to look at the degeneration of political culture in our country. We have to look at the quality of education that children receive. Building up values. Education is not just about reading and writing, it's also about the inculcation of values. And in our co-educational school system, we have to encourage respect and, well, self-esteem on the one hand, and also respect between boys and girls. And I think this is the basis of educating young people in family life. And the second thing, of course, is the existing families. Some people come from households which are themselves abusive. And I've spoken with many persons in the education system who report about instances of incest involving stepfathers or fathers. They report on other, what I call, aberrations. And if we are to deal with the question that you raised, the question of neglect and inefficiency, it is partly, of course, the responsibility of families and households, but I would say that in the churches, in the masjids, in the mandirs, and also in the education system, we need to inculcate those values. So once they are absent from the education system, once they are absent from the social system, once there are no institutions which reinforce the self-esteem of young women and the education of of boys, we're going to find these problems when they are ready to lead families themselves. So I hope that answers your question, but I would go back to the education system and I'd ensure that the values are inculcated at primary and secondary level, especially when young men and women start to play mommy and daddy. That's when you need to ensure that the values of respect are taught to our young people.
Mrs. Hughes, do you have anything to add to that? Just press it once.
All right. I really would only like to add to the importance of putting it within the curriculum of the schools. And I know in my day, I don't want to date myself, but we certainly had things like moral education, and some of that is missing in schools today. So we have a challenge in that so many of in terms of our family structure, it keeps changing. We have a lot more single parent households, women heading households, and some of the support that should be there in terms of family values, we tend not to be instilling in the next generation. So I would like to see in the education system a more formal introduction of family values and the principles that will deal with this issue.
Thank you very much. We'll now have a question from a youth representative.
Hello, good evening. Making reference to what Ms. Cathy Hughes said about the police stations having the special victims unit, and what stood out to me is the idea of having social workers and psychologists attached to these units. My question is, what are plans in place to improve the education system or improve the recruitment system to ensure that social workers are available and psychologists are available to work in these institutions?
At the end of the day, part of the challenge is that many of the professionals in those areas are not receiving a salary that they can comfortably live on. So one of the things that we need to look at, even in terms of teachers in schools, as we know, the nurses, and in the area of domestic violence, we need to ensure that we can up the level of training and also ensure that we are paying people a salary that they can live on, that they can make a career out of this. What we found, and I've noticed it in the newspaper articles, every time a woman unfortunately is killed, most of the newspaper reports make mention of the fact that either the neighbor or some family member had a sense that this might have happened. And therefore it means that the intervention is not being done when the first signs of abuse are being displayed. So whether it is in the school structure, one of the things we want to do is make sure that there is a guidance counselor in every single school. So that imagine if a child is seeing indications of problems at school, they should be able to go to the guidance counselor and say, hey, you know, there's this problem at home with mommy and daddy or mommy and partner or whomever, you know. And so the guidance counselor is important in school. In the police, we find that quite often reports have been made before, but the training and level of personnel at the police stations has not been up to scratch. And therefore that's why we think it's important to have a qualified, trained individual that can act on the first indications. And to do that, we have to put the requisite funding into our national budget. It has to be something that we give, we make it a priority and we fund it as it needs to be funded.
Mr. Granger, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I have a lot to add. We certainly have to bring the police force up to strength. Right now it's on strength. And we have to recruit more women police officers. Paying police $57,000 a month is not a good idea. It is not going to attract quality people, as Cathy said, and it's not going to retain people of quality. They'll want to move on. But you need persons who are capable of extending sympathetic counsel to victims of violence. And very often a burly station sergeant is not the best person. And many women who've been victims of violence are disinclined to make reports about sensitive matters to persons who are strangers and persons who they feel might not sympathize with them. We have in this country something called community and neighborhood policing, which really don't police communities and neighborhoods. These are really vigilante groups. Community policing is not a group, it is a method of policing. Neighborhood policing is a method of policing. So when there are vulnerable persons, like a 75-year-old widow living alone on the Essequibo coast, the community would know that she is vulnerable. If you go to Wackenham Island, you'll see a little monument. A little 10-year-old girl was raped by 3 boys several years ago. Similarly, Mocha. When you know there are vulnerable persons in your community, if you do have a system of neighborhood policing, they will help to protect. They'll be able to identify the threats and the risks and offer protection, but it is not happening now. So we have to look at the policing system which protects vulnerable people. And even if or whenever a report is made to them, that person could be assured of sympathetic counsel. There is a record, I think Guyana Human Rights Association has published the facts that most of the cases of rape and even some domestic violence never reach trial, and those that reach trial hardly ever result in conviction. And this is because there's a failure in something called the Guyana Police Force. And we recommend that the Guyana Police Force be reformed to deal more sympathetically with the half of the population who are women and who make complaints of a domestic nature.
Thank you very much. Our next question coming from emails. It says, I'm concerned about the tax rate of 30%, and of course that's PAYE, 16% VAT, heavy import duties for vehicles which are mostly used, and other burdensome taxes on Guyanese. If the APNU+AFC coalition won the upcoming general and regional elections, what will be your specific policies in terms of tax reform?
If I can start, this is something that we have examined before. As you know, APNU and AFC have been collaborating during the brief life of the 10th Parliament between 2012 and the 10th of November 2014. We have made proposals for the reduction of the VAT, which have not been agreed by the executive. We have made proposals for the raising of the income tax threshold, which affects the PAYE. And we have been told by the executive that they were setting up a tax reform commission. This was told to us in January, February 2012, and yet we are still to see that commission. So we will pursue the tax reform, the establishment of a tax reform commission, with a view to raising the income tax threshold, and in other words, reducing the PAYE as well, reducing the VAT, and both parties have committed to that. And of course, as far as vehicles are concerned, this is not something that has been discussed among the coalition partners at the present time, but we are very likely to reduce the tariff on new vehicles and increase the tariff on old vehicles. Old vehicles with old tires have very short and messy careers, and if people are encouraged to buy new vehicles or to buy new tires, it will be good for the environment. So we believe it's a cockeyed policy to tax new vehicles at such a high rate and allow so many smoky old vehicles. Some of them are danger to the driver and passenger as well as road users, on the roads. So it's a strange policy that this government is pursuing, and it's doing damage to the environment, it's doing damage to human lives, I can tell you that.
Before you follow up, Mrs. Hughes, I'd like to ask Mr. Granger, is there a specific number or range that you can identify in terms of the PAYE? Is there a percentage that the coalition would like to see the PAYE and the value-added tax be lowered to?
As I said, as you know, the coalition only signed its accord on the 14th of February, and some of these decisions have not been made collectively, and I would not like to make an announcement now in the absence of my partners.
I just wanted to add that when we talk about the tax system, we certainly were looking at increasing, or rather the introduction and advocating for the introduction of lower interest rates for female-headed households, and also for individuals that are buying their home for the first time. And that would be lower interest rates at financial institutions. I mentioned also the implementation of a child tax credit program for employers, and of course tax credits for companies that are willing to provide in-house daycare facilities. So I just wanted to reiterate those.
Thank you very much. Is there any other women issues? Any? No? All right, we will move to youth issues.
I'm sorry to come in again. There's a slight omission.
Sure.
Because over the last 3 months or so, I've been visiting many communities in the hinterland, and the cost of living in the hinterland, because much of what is needed in the household has to be flown in. And we have huge areas in the hinterland. For example, the Rupununi alone is bigger than Costa Rica. Not a single highway. It costs $5,000 for a single person to ride in a minibus from Aishalton to Lethem. So you can imagine the cost of commodities. And people get the same pensions as people in the coastline. But every single item costs more. So when we speak about the tax regime, you speak about reducing or really removing any form of taxation on what a household needs to survive on a day-to-day basis, particularly for those people in the hinterland. Gasoline, the last time I was there, cost about $2,800 a gallon at Camera, and most of the travel is by river. There are no roads. So the cost of living is very oppressive. So we definitely need a tax regime which takes into consideration the plight of residents of the hinterland.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening. I have a question. I have seen a lot of youth completing the secondary education and finding it very hard to get a job. What will be done to decrease the level of poor employment in Guyana?
You'll find them jobs. It's not a silly answer. We need to examine the type of education we give young people. And it is my view, and I've announced it publicly, that Guyana is essentially not a manufacturing country, it is essentially an agrarian agricultural country, and there must be an agricultural institute in every single region of this country. And there must also be a technical institute. I'm aware that many young people, for example, the hinterland which I visit more frequently, they leave school and they have nothing to do in their villages. I don't want to say what they do, but some of them drift over the border to Brazil. They may have CXC subjects. They end up working as farmhands or as waitresses in a restaurant, or doing something out of Guyana which they are not educated to do or not prepared to do, and maybe you can say it's not doesn't provide them with a satisfactory or meaningful career. We do believe that if there were more agricultural and technical institutes, people who leave secondary school would be able to get a skill which will equip them to remain in their regions and make successful lives. But of course it has to be done in conjunction with other factors such as farm-to-market roads and proper agro-processing facilities in their very communities. So the unemployment problem will not be solved by government giving jobs. This government has a reputation of jobless growth. They speak about a bigger pie, but the few rich are becoming richer and the many poor are becoming poorer, and you can see an income gap opening. What we need to do is encourage more young people to become entrepreneurs, to give them the training in institutes, technical and agricultural institutes, and give them the resources to enable them to set up businesses of their own. I am very confident from what I've seen throughout the hinterland that almost every agricultural commodity we produce could be marketed in the Eastern Caribbean or elsewhere. It sometimes pains me to have to buy, Guatemalan, I hope they know Guatemalans here, Guatemalan plantain chips and guava cheese. These are things that Granny used to make. And we need to put manufacturing into the hands of young people so they could become employed. And so we'll grow the economy in a more balanced way. So this is our plan, to develop more agro-processing, to develop the manufacturing sector, and of course it calls for energy and other things. But we believe that unemployment is not with us to stay. We can provide employment if we had a more imaginative educational program and provided that quality education to our young people when they leave school. Too many young people are looking forward to wage labor, and that will be a pitfall. In the new economy, we have to start thinking about entrepreneurship, manufacturing.
Thank you very much. Before we come back around to women, the next question sent by email says, "Dear candidates, will more emphasis be placed on the local creative and cultural industry so as to encourage and give confidence to local entrepreneurs? If so, what specific steps will you take to grow this industry and ensure its sustainability?"
Well, for start, I'm happy to say that just recently a group of private sector individuals with some funding from government started the music school. But traditionally, when you look at the other areas, there really is not enough facilities. Schools, for example, most schools do not have a music department with equipment. The schools that actually have instruments are some of the top, what we call the traditional top schools. So for a start within our school structure, we need to bring music back into our schools so we can start nurturing individuals and the talent from that age. When it comes to at the secondary or a post-secondary level, we certainly need to make sure that there's training available. Theatre Guild, I used to be a part of Theatre Guild, is a classic example of a group of young people that are doing something. So we need to make sure that we put the requisite funding in place so that more organizations, private sector organizations, or just young people that want to get into more creative industries can do that. In places like Trinidad, for example, in the area of video production, every year the budget allocates X number of dollars, whereby producers that want to produce local documentaries or whatever it is have an opportunity to put forward their scripts and to be part of a pool and be selected for funding for those areas. The same thing can happen in the area of music, developing more plays, more performances in the area of dance. There's very little that's actually invested in the creative industries, and therefore the more we can put the funds, the requisite funds there, we think that individuals, young people, the private sector would be able to run more with this.
Thank you very much. Mr. Granger, is there anything to add?
Well, this is a wide field, and we need to examine the complexity of Guyanese society. When I move about the hinterland, when I campaign, I meet people over and over again who do not speak English as their first language. And this is a big problem. It's a cultural problem, yes, but when you have a Cuban-trained doctor speaking to a Wapishan who does not speak English as his first language, you get medical problems, you get complications, because the patient doesn't understand what the doctor is saying, the doctor doesn't understand what the patient is saying. We have 9 indigenous languages, and people, many of them from the coastline, don't have a clue what people mean. You may make a joke or something, but the person doesn't really understand what you're saying. So indigenous language is a very important aspect of culture. Sport too is an important aspect of culture. Over and over again I see highly talented, up to last Saturday night, I was in Maruka, and you have young people playing on without lights, rough ground, very talented footballers, and some of the best footballers in this country come from the hinterland because they play the Brazilians, they play with the Venezuelans, but we don't have sports centers. Theater, poetry, history, even tourism. These are various aspects of our culture, but there is no real cultural policy in this country. There is no youth policy in this country, and as a result of that, things are just left, things are just neglected, things are just ignored or abandoned, and even very important festivals. Chinese immigration, you hardly hear about that. Portuguese immigration, you hardly hear about that. You only hear about the immigration of other groups, So we need a holistic approach to culture, not just cherry-picking a few issues, but we need to look to see what develops the entire country and what unites the country. And by ignoring it, by ignoring the indigenous people, by ignoring other minorities, we do not solve the problems, because after a while these problems fester, and the problems lead to a misunderstanding. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, I can tell you now, about cultural issues throughout this country. A lot of misunderstanding, and some of that misunderstanding is becoming evident now. We're in election season again.
Thank you very much. Question from the floor?
Yes, good evening everyone. My question has to do with leadership and example. And what I would like to know is, with your party, would you think about having like a code of conduct for all representatives at the highest level of governance, so that issues of things like sexual harassment, domestic violence, even sexual violence, if it occurs, or if there's an indication that some member would have been involved in such things, that we as Guyanese can know that it would be dealt with fairly as any other person in the society.
APNU did promulgate a code of service, or 2 codes of service, one for members of the RDCs and one for members of the National Assembly. And after the 11th of May we'll have one for members of the cabinet as well.
In addition to supporting a code of conduct, our position would be, if we have deviations from the normal, acceptable behavior, and if we have criminal activity in terms of sexual, liaisons or anything of that nature, we would throw the person out. There is no way that we would be keeping on board anybody that displays unacceptable behavior. No way at all.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening. I'm Clyde Edwards from Parramatta, Region 8. My question is, the major problem in my region is transportation difficulties due to bad road and high cost of air transport. I would like to know what the new government, if you are being elected, would do to alleviate this problem.
We're aware that the only way to move across the Pataro-Separoni region, Region 8, is by what the Guyana government calls a safari. Every year they have a safari. That's the only way you can move from east to west in that region. It is a productive region. It is rich in gold, diamonds, and timber. It is the most beautiful region. It is at the heart of Guyana. It is the most beautiful region in this country. And I wish some of you could visit that region. It contains the most beautiful waterfalls, the most beautiful mountains, and unfortunately it receives the least attention in terms of infrastructure development. We cannot develop this country without highways and bridges. We cannot continue to ignore that problem. We cannot sweep it under the carpet. We have to start plowing back some of the revenue from gold, diamonds, and timber, not into housing schemes run by the Ministry of Housing and Water, but into the development of infrastructure in the hinterland. And we cannot avoid the problem. We have to provide regions 1, 7, 8, and 9 with roads and bridges. They will pay for themselves. Infrastructure is investment. So I sympathize with you because I know the area, I know Pacaramas, and you're quite right. The farmers cannot get their produce to market. And in fact, some of the biggest tomatoes I've ever seen in my life in any country, biggest potatoes, and I understand, although I've not used the product, some of the best ganja come from the Pacaramas. You have fertile valleys, you have very fertile areas there, and I do agree with you that transport is a problem. In fact, once I was at the Mahdia airport, not too long ago, Dr. Norton is here, he would remember. We were at that airport for a couple of hours in the afternoon, waiting for what could be called a connecting flight. And there must be over 15 flights landing and taking off. I'm sure that Mahdia airstrip is probably, the second busiest airstrip in the country. So it is impossible to develop a huge region, bigger than Kuwait, with aircraft alone. You need roads, and the next government will spend money on roads, good roads that will help farmers to take their produce to market, help with the evacuation of people who are ill, and help people to live a normal life. But life in the Pacaramas is very abnormal. Every little valley is cut off because it's so expensive to go, from place to place. In fact, the government, this current government, very cynically gave the regional chairman, who comes from the Alliance for Change, an ATV as his personal transport. I thought there was a bit of insolence. When you saw his typewriter, you could understand.
Yes. Thank you, Mr.
He really has a typewriter. It's a serious matter. when a government, a central government, could give a chairman of a region as bigger than Kuwait a typewriter, a royal typewriter, which is 35 years old.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, Mrs. Hughes, the time has expired for your response. Mr. Granger used the entire time up. All right. Before we come back to women's issues, the next question says, what measures would an APNU+AFC government implement to ensure that senior appointments in ministries and state-controlled agencies are awarded on merit and not based on nepotism or party loyalty?
At the start of the PPP's administration in 1992, it had in its possession a public sector reform program which had reduced the number of ministries to about 12 and had attempted to professionalize the Guyana public service. That was thrown out of the window. And what has happened now, particularly after the public service strike of 1998, the 8-week strike, a decision seems to have been taken to politicize the public service, in the sense that the whole stratum of permanent secretaries was swept away, and people were given what they call a contract. So instead of generating professional public servants, you have contract employees, and when a contract employee does not conform or comply with the wishes of the government, the contract is terminated. So what we have here is a weakened public service, and we will re-professionalize the public service by appointing people based on merit. And that is a decision that we've taken already, and persons who have been brought in because of who their father is or who their uncle is will not find a place in the upper echelons of the new public service. But we have to build a public service that is committed to making sure that our development takes place in accordance with the needs of our people. You know, if you're going to lay a fiber optic cable from Lethem, for example, well, you know, charity begins at home, but you have to look for competent people, you know, and this has been a problem with the PPP administration over the last 23 years.
We intend to deliver, and I think it's a good thing that this is a totally different time. This is not really an election campaign, but almost like a movement, and Guyanese will no longer accept governments that have operated the way this government has operated in the last 20 years. And therefore, fundamental to the fact is the fact that we have to put good people in place, because we have to deliver to you. You are not going to give us this time around 20 years to do as we like and not deliver. So we're going to put the best people in place so they deliver to the people of this country. If not, we recognize from now that the second time around you will not be electing us again.
Question from the floor.
Good evening. Joel Simpson from Sassad. My question is directed particularly to Mr. Granger, though Mrs. Hughes can also feel free to chime in. One of the issues that my organization has been grappling with, one of the gender issues that we've been grappling with recently, is discrimination against same-sex couples in the Army, particularly lesbian soldiers. Just a few weeks ago, my colleague Shalana had to return to the office on a Saturday evening to counsel a lesbian couple from the Army who, to their own admission, were in an abusive relationship. Both partners came to Sassad on a Saturday night for counseling. My question is, and they came down from Tamari because they didn't feel comfortable dealing with this issue in the Army, although I understand that there are some provisions made for counseling and things like that. And this stems from a perception of discrimination where particularly lesbian couples who have been forced out, whether pictures have leaked and that sort of thing, have been asked to leave the Army. News source broke a story to that effect in 2013, 2014. So my question is, what will an APNU+AFC coalition government, how will that government deal with this issue, particularly in terms of policy at the level of the Ministry of Home Affairs, both for the Army and the issue of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in the workplace generally?
Well, the question refers to a specific organization, the Defense Force, and I do not know what regulations apply at present. What I could say is that there is no, in my day, which is a long time ago, there was no general policy against persons, against homosexuals or lesbians. What was important is that we avoid abusive relationships, and because of the rank structure, there is possibility of abuse or exploitation, and once there's exploitation, there's going to be problems. There was no policy that discriminated against homosexuals, but what I would say is that because of the way the Defense Force operated at that time, please bear in mind I cannot speak about the Defense Force at present, and I left the Army some time ago. It is inadvisable or imprudent to have persons at remote locations or in certain situations in operational sites or locations who are in same-sex relationships. I have seen numerous instances where it could lead to a complete breakdown in discipline. And although there's no discrimination, it's better to have separation, because you can go into a situation in the border, the hinterland or somewhere, where your focus should be on operational readiness, but because of the presence of persons who are in same-sex relationships, sometimes people set aside their operational objectives and pursue social objectives, personal objectives. And there have been situations, and I think those people who advocate same-sex relations must understand that the Defense Force in operational situations should be exempt from this type of action. I'm not saying they should be sent out of the force, no way. But there are certain situations in which people ought not to be serving together. It's just like having a husband and wife at a border location. You know, it's not advisable. I don't think that you can get the best out of the operational efficiency of our soldiers if you have that type of if people are cohabiting in that type of relationship. So all I would recommend is that there is no discrimination, but there should be separation depending on the operational requirements at that time.
All right. Another question, youth question.
Good night, everyone. I'm Joe Joseph, recent university graduate. My question tonight to the panel is, given Guyana's macro and socio-economic challenges and opportunities, should the coalition win the upcoming elections, what specific initiatives will be pursued to foster greater youth entrepreneurship so that we may be a driving force behind economic growth and development and become employers ourselves as opposed to being mere employees?
If I can start off briefly, I did mention the need to set up the types of institutes which could take school leavers, particularly after primary school, after matriculation, into fields which would encourage them to go into agro-processing, manufacturing, cottage industries, and other forms of employment. I think that is, it has, in my view, it should start at the educational level. At the next level, of course, would be the provision of the types of resources. Sometimes young people would need some form of startup capital, and I believe my colleague mentioned the need for microfinance to enable young people to start small enterprises, and those enterprises eventually could feed larger enterprises. For example, fruit juice. You know, they can start fruit juice at the farm level, at the household level, and sell the produce to bigger manufacturers, pepper sauce, I know that on the Essequibo Coast there used to be a thriving, I don't know if it still exists, a thriving a fruit juice enterprise. And this was, the fruit were gathered from farmers, and young people could go into that, growing peppers, growing guavas, growing mangoes. And in this regard, I want to say that, again, in January this year, we were in the Moka Moka in the Rupununi, and we were driving on mangoes. We were actually driving on mangoes because the mangoes are too many for the children to eat. Even the pigs weren't eating the mangoes. But what we need is to have the type of entrepreneurship, the type of equipment which will encourage young people. I don't want to rob Cathy of time. The type of equipment which will enable them to convert the mangoes into mango chunks or mango juices. But that's not happening in Moka Moka. Cathy.
It was on.
Added to that, we have a plan to implement in each of the 10 regions mechanical training workshops. One of the things we recognize is that it's important to ensure that we have a level and educated young force that we can actually build on their skills. So these mechanical training workshops will provide apprenticeship aspects to it. So when it comes to encouraging young people to get into entrepreneurial activity, we want to make sure that A, they get the requisite training in an area that they're interested in, but also that they can get an apprenticeship to some particular company or organization so they get the on-the-job skills. We think that that's a foundation on which the training and the experience on which they then can move into their own businesses once the requisite funding is available. And we spoke to you previously on the importance of providing microfinancing for young people and specifically women. We have a very heavy emphasis on those two groups.
Our next question from email says, good evening, I'd like this question to be answered by Mr. Granger. If your party is elected to serve the people of Guyana, what policies would your administration implement to ensure that teachers and other key public servants are properly compensated and motivated for their services?
Well, first of all, I repeat what I said, what I've been saying over the last 4 years, that at this point in Guyana's development, teachers should be the best paid public servants. The nurses didn't like it, but it's a commitment that I have to young people and to the teachers. We are not going to turn the education system around if we don't attract the best qualified persons there. And that is a commitment I gave to teachers, lecturers at universities, Sale Potter College of Education. We have to get the finest Guyanese. I meet these people in Brooklyn. I meet them in Barbados. You know they've been going to Bahamas. Teacher of the Year in Bahamas is probably a Guyanese. Teacher of the Year in Belize is a Guyanese. Our teachers have been fleeing Guyana because of the poor conditions. And the only way we can retain them is by providing better emoluments and better conditions for the teachers. But right now that is not happening. So I have made a commitment. I also made a commitment to teachers, 1 laptop per teacher. I can't have teachers teaching youngsters and they themselves don't have access to the information superhighway. They don't have access to computers. And I have started a program, and you might have read about it in the papers, that I asked friendly people to give me computers or iPad or some device, tablets. And when I go, I say, who is the head teacher? And I give her a tablet. I've done it in Ibini, I've done it in Charlton, I've done it in Awariwa now. And this is the way we intend to go. We have to put more emphasis on teachers if we are to turn this country around.
All right, coming back to women's issues, this is our 15-minute warning. We have 15 minutes remaining, so let's make our questions very succinct, and so we can give the candidates more time to respond. Go ahead.
I'm Laura George of the APA. I've listened to your comments, your positions on the development in the hinterland and all of that. I'd like to know what specific plans do you have in addressing, or measuring rather, the impacts of development that has been happening so far, development, and I say that in quotation marks. How do you intend to measure that? Because development comes with negatives and positives. How do you intend to do that to measure the impacts on indigenous communities that come from mining, from road building, from other so many programs that have been there that I see you're also mentioning as well? Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand the question fully, but I will try to respond. When I go to Parishara or Yupukari and I see a whole class of primary school students coming out at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and they're all barefooted, I feel that that is a good indicator of the lack of development. When I go to the Rupununi, I see no roads, or I see broken bridges, old wooden bridges. When I listen to the voices of the people in Iowa or in Quarry, and they tell me what their problems are, I realize that very little that we speak about in development terms has impacted on them, the day-to-day lives. How can we measure development? Look at poverty, look at access to education, look at access to jobs, look at the quality of health, look at the ability of youngsters to pursue independent lives as farmers, as businessmen. All of these are indicators. And I believe that throughout the hinterland, in all 4 regions, in fact, indigenous people occupy at least 9 out of the 10 regions, because you also have in Region 4 at St. Cuthbert's, Region 5 at Maracaibo, Region 6 at Siparuta and Oriala. So in all of the regions, Region 10, of course, you have in Kalkuni, Bini, and elsewhere. In all of the regions, indigenous people, whether they describe it as hinterland or not, have been suffering, and any index of human development you apply will show that they rank very low, even in comparison with other Guyanese. So we can measure the impact, and this is a focus, as I've made some statements before in the hinterland. We feel that developing infrastructure, developing the educational system. We know that 2,500 indigenous people, children, live in the dormitories in secondary schools. These are all areas. Some parents refuse to send their children to dormitories. They send a daughter and get back too. And these are things we need to take very seriously. The hinterland problems are not easy, and they must not be swept under the carpet. So I'm aware of some of these issues, and we need to have a government that cares about the indigenous people and not just uses the hinterland as a vote farm.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Elsie Harry. I'm a student at the University of Guyana, and in addition to the University of Guyana basically falling apart, I sit on the university's council, and one of the problems that we face as students is our voice being drowned out by all the other people that make up the university's council. It's 20 plus members, and it's 1 student rep, and it's people from different areas of society that come in with their own personal interests, their own political interests. So I want to know, what is the coalition's plan to fix this problem of partisan interests on the council, which governs the university? And in addition to that, we also have disabled students at the University of Guyana, and simple things like the library providing books in Braille for these students to be able to read notes. Just this morning, I went to volunteer to scan notes for these students to be able to get their material to study for exams. And all throughout this campaigning season, I haven't heard very much about what is going to be done for the University of Guyana and as well for disabled students. And the youths, we are over 50% of the population, so we will have a heavy say on who gets elected after May 11. So I would like to know, beyond just pumping money into UG, what is the plan to make it sustainable, to make it comparable to international universities?
Well, if you ever... You finished?
Yes, go ahead.
If you've ever been to St. Augustine or Cave Hill or Mona campus in the University of the West Indies system, you'd see how different Turkana is. The big problem is funding. It is not necessarily political partisanship first. The big problem is financial, and UG probably needs about 4 times what it's getting now from the government. I think if you can build a first class, a 5-star hotel, you could build a 5-star university. And this is where our priorities must lie. I have been connected with the university for, different stages of my career, so I understand how you feel. I've studied in the stables, I've had classes with umbrellas, in classrooms because of leaks. But we have to provide at least the physical infrastructure. We have to fix the libraries. We have to fix the laboratories. We have to fix the lavatories. We have to fix the whole campus. So we do need money first and foremost. As far as the second problem is concerned, political control, that could be dealt with. We do feel that I do know there must have been half a dozen studies at the University of Guyana over the last 50 years. The university is 52 years now, I think, or thereabouts. And most of those studies point to funding, they point to the partisan control of the council, and the failure to attract quality lecturers and provide the same facilities you were speaking about. These are important issues which have to be dealt with, I agree, but we are committed to providing the types of funds or the level of funding that is necessary to move the UG closer to what you see at Cave Hill or St. Augustine. And those of us who had the benefit of studying at those other campuses will know that you can't do it without money.
Thank you very much. All right, we have 5 minutes remaining.
I'm sorry, you haven't answered the point about challenge students, but you go ahead.
Yes.
I'm working with the lights.
Yeah.
5 minutes. So these will be our last 2 questions from the floor. Before those 2 questions are asked, the next question from email says, how does your government propose to address the issue of racism in Guyana?
Most societies, I think, are plagued with racism, but I believe that Guyana is better poised now to overcome the problem for several reasons. Number one is that a large percentage of the Guyanese population is mixed, and race does not really make sense to maybe a third or a greater percentage of our population because they're so mixed. And people can't appeal to them on racial grounds. It's something that I've had to confront when I was a publisher. People say, look, don't tell me how I look. I am mixed and I think mixed, So we are overcoming that problem by the normal process of miscegenation. But apart from that, we need to look at education. And that's why I mentioned when I spoke about the indigenous people, some civil servants or other people, don't let me blame civil servants, please, go into the hinterland and they can't speak a single word of Akawayo or Arakuna or Patamona or Makushi. So we need to use our education system to encourage persons in officialdom and elsewhere to appreciate the values of other ethnic groups. And we need to remove the distinction between coastland and hinterland. Many people in the coastland still regard the hinterland as bush. And you tell people to serve in the hinterland, I ain't going in the bush. Because the cost of living is higher, sometimes the quality of life is lower. And we need to look at these things because they encourage racial attitudes towards the people, particularly indigenous people, who live in those areas. Similarly, on the coastland, when you look at the pattern of villages, some are almost exclusively one ethnic group next to villages of another ethnic group. And people have never really, throughout their academic lives, gotten the type of education which helps them to understand other groups. So these are things this will be a start in helping to break down the barriers of racism. Ignorance of other ethnic groups is one of the biggest problems, and I believe education will overcome that ignorance.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Miss. Go right ahead. We're hearing you. Go ahead.
Cathy Hughes, public servant. Now, I want to touch on a very sore point, national insurance scheme. Just recently, I was there to do my spectacles because it got broken, and I had to stand the expense of my spectacles because they said the 2 years isn't up. So all I got back from $35,000 is $6,666. What I want to ask Mr. Granger, in your planning, what system you have in place for that? Also, there was a senior person who was there, a woman in her 70s, and the clerk told her, we couldn't give you a spectacles because your 2 years is not up. So she said, son, there's nothing you can do to help me? He said, no, mom, you got to go and find your spectacles the best way you could. That was it. Then another point is that seniors who have given their lives to this country as youth cannot go to the national insurance scheme anymore to get medications that they cannot acquire at a drugstore. Could you please put that in your planning, and also a paternal provision? Because when a mother got baby, there is you need help. So a paternal vacation for the men, even for a month or 2 months, to help along in the field.
I don't know if those were questions, but if you'd like to comment, please go right ahead.
Well, I can start. The first thing to do with the NIS is change the chairman of the board. I think Dr. Roger Lunton should be retired from that position. And we need to review the working of the entire national insurance scheme, which is being used as a sort of cow to provide financial milk to this regime. It was established, I think 47 years ago or thereabouts, to provide for the ordinary people in this country from cradle to grave. But the money is being siphoned off. In fact, this entire scheme is in jeopardy of collapse because the money is being siphoned off into all sorts of harebrained schemes by the people in office. So I don't want to hog all the questions. I'll give Cathy some of the, an opportunity to deal with these questions. But it is when you're older you need more medication, and it is a great paradox that older folk cannot have access to cheaper medication or spectacles or dentures. I know some people have access to dental treatment. But we certainly need to review the working of the entire national insurance scheme to bring it back in line with what it was intended to do by the founders, that is the PNC, which founded it in 1968 or thereabouts. Cathy?
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, guys, it's hard to see here. We really need to overhaul the national insurance scheme. We know each of us has had an incident or a situation. It's funny that we're talking about this tonight because today I got a call from a gentleman in De Willem, and he actually was injured on his job, cannot work, has a nervous problem, in fact broke his back, and has for the last 3 years been trying to collect some kind of compensation. And one of the important things that we need to do is to make sure that we use the existing technology to bring the databases of the NIS up to date. Every small company is able to keep accurate records, and the NIS is one of the few institutions that has a database that cannot tell you whether you have paid all your contributions. And the onus always is on the individual, on the citizen, to go and prove your case. Well, that's not what it was set up to do. So really, we need to change that completely. The other thing too is, as you know, there's several weird rules and regulations. One is the fact that you must have a pre-existing condition before you can get benefits. Now, if you get to the age 60 or 70 and develop a condition, why have you been paying NIS for all these years? Clearly, at age 20 or 30 when you started to work, you would not have had that pre-existing condition. So isn't the fund supposed to protect you and prepare you and give you support should these eventualities arise? So the entire system has to be revamped. The focus has not been on the citizen, but on using the funds to fund the projects and ideas of a very small select group of people.
We can tell you're very passionate about that. Our final question from the floor.
Hi, good evening, Royston Elkins. I'm a sportsman who had to choose education over sports because there wasn't a system in place to facilitate both. I would want to know what a comprehensive sports development strategy would look like. Should you be elected to ensure that persons don't have to make that choice, or would just struggle with both?
It would look like having sports centers in every region so that our young athletes, our footballers, our swimmers could develop their talents in every single region. They don't have to come to Providence to play under lights. It would look like ensuring that sports are part of the curriculum. I went to school part of my life in at Auckland Church of Scotland School in the quarantine, and every time I passed I shake my head. It looked like an army barracks, so it must have been preparing me for a future career. But it is not the type of place which encourages sport. Every school should have a sports field, should have a gymnasium. I remember years ago as a young officer, the first multilateral school I went into was Anne Regina Multilateral School, ARMS, on the Essequibo Coast. Again, built by that government, which some people like to malign. But when I looked into it, there was gymnasiums, there was sport facilities, and I saw the possibility of developing Guyana into a real sporting nation. Right now, sport has become an exclusive preserve of a few people, and as you say, you're forced to make a choice. It should be normal. I had the opportunity to go to a secondary school which allowed balanced development, and some of the best students were also good sportsmen. So I would like to see a return to schools, primary and secondary schools, with good sports fields, good sporting facilities, good gymnasiums, and instructors. So part of the plan is not only at the regional level to have regional sports centers, but also the level of the schools to start building schools in which sports fields are part of the school property. You don't have to travel, some distance to get, and particularly in the hinterland, you'll be surprised the quality of footballers coming from Ramadan and other parts of the hinterland, but they don't have the resources and facilities to develop them. Quick, Cathy, quick.
For us, housing is not just the allocation of a house lot. And therefore, one of the things that we need to bring back is ensuring that when we design communities, that there is a recreation ground, that there is a park where young people can go and spend their time in productive sporting activity. I mean, today, if you look at it, we give people a house lot. We don't even give them. We make them pay for a house lot. And quite often, the infrastructure is not in place. I have a very good friend who just paid $500,000 for a lot in Zeeland, and there is no electricity still. She's been there about 3 years, and she is not a person that can afford to pay $500 for a lot. But the way what she was told is that this is all that's available. You better take it, or you ain't gonna get anything. We have to change that. Recreational grounds in all communities.
Thank you. Our final question for the night, and I'd like you to see if you can answer this in a minute or less. Given the current state of roads and other infrastructure in Guyana, how would you ensure taxpayers' dollars are wisely invested and high quality work is delivered every time to the people of Guyana?
And both parties, both APNU and AFC, have advocated and struggled for public procurement commission. We intend to strengthen the public service apparatus to enable it to inspect projects which are executed. We all know about the danger of election roads. They're built 1 month before the elections and they disappear 1 month after the elections. And we feel that the road infrastructure can continue to remain part of private enterprise, but they must be held to certain standards, certain engineering standards and inspections. And if people don't produce products or infrastructure of a certain standard, they won't be paid. So that's what we're in about. We're about public procurement, transparent procurement, and for the provision of services, and ensuring that there is proper inspection before things are signed off, or we won't end up with things like the fiber optic cable. Yes, Cathy.
Cathy, you've been battling this mic all night.
I know. I can't see properly from up here. Okay, so one of the things that I think we will be much better at doing is establishing the priorities when it comes to the building of roads and infrastructure in Guyana. And many of you would know, if I asked you if you were ever in a traffic jam from the exit of the airport to just about 5 minutes drive to where there's that Indi Bihari sign, you know what I'm talking about? Right. Have any of you ever had a traffic jam from there? It's literally not more than, I would say, 600, maybe a mile and a half. We have spent 800 million of your taxpayers' dollars, of our money was spent making the exit of the airport just 2 miles down the road a 4-lane highway. Now that is totally ridiculous, because if you look at the number of planes that land and the fact that most of us have never ever experienced a traffic jam in that area, why would you spend $800 million? And what is interesting is the next time you go to the airport, you will notice that it is still under construction. It's half completed. Those are the kinds of wastage that we will not tolerate.
Thank you very much. And this brings us to the end of the question and answer segment of tonight's forum. And I'll invite you to put your hands together as we thank the candidates for placing themselves on the scrutiny tonight. And I'll now invite the moderator, the chairperson, to take the remainder of tonight's program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think the moderator deserves a round of applause for handling us so efficiently and smoothly. Thanks also to Brigadier David Granger for fielding the questions so smoothly also. And a special thanks, I'm so sorry that I put you in the hot seat, Mrs. Cathy Hughes, but I know you're perfectly capable, and you showed that tonight. So thank you ever so much. And audience, I know you have put the candidates in the hot seat. I want to put you now in the hot seat. Is everybody registered? Have you got your ID card? No? Yes, okay. So it means that you will be voting. And the young people gave this out just before you came in. I know most of you are panning with it. But I want you to just repeat what it says. Repeat with me, please. The voter's pledge card. And let's do this together. I am voting to get action on ending violence against women, education reform, ending teenage pregnancy, healthcare system reform, creating jobs. I therefore pledge to educate myself to the best of my ability on the issue concerning my community, region, and country. I pledge to vote on May 11, 2015, to advocate for peaceful, non-violent elections, to advocate for harmony and inclusiveness, to take 4 persons, I say 4+ persons with me to vote, to share voting pledges with all my friends and family through all resources available to me. Yes, I pledge to vote on issues, not race, for the betterment of my country, Guyana. Give yourselves a round of applause. Great, so now we have Dr. Stewart, who will do the presentation of the candidates' pledge. We're not going to be signing tonight. There will be a special signing ceremony for that. But we will now have the presentation of the candidates' pledge to Brigadier David Granger, the presidential candidate of the coalition. And let's just tell you what's on the pledge card. The pledge card says, my pledge to the women and youth of Guyana when elected within the first 6 months is to address the educational system by creating a clear vision, leadership, high standards, and commitment to equity, which must affect teaching and learning in the classroom and involving all stakeholders. I pledge to address violence against women, to address reforming of the healthcare system, to address teenage pregnancy, and to allocate resources, and to allocate the necessary resources to prevent teenage pregnancy, to prosecute persons accused of statutory rape, to prosecute parents who settle outside courts, to empower communities, adolescents, and young people to prevent and respond to early sexual activity in teenage pregnancy, and finally to incorporate sexual education in the educational framework. I pledge also to address job creation, to ensure greater and more fruitful collaboration between governments and the private sector to increase employment. And the candidate election pledge card says, yes, I pledge to work diligently to ensure I meet standards expected of me on issues listed for the betterment of our country, Guyana. So we will have a special signing ceremony for that. At this time, I'd like to welcome to the podium Ms. Marissa Loudon, who's a member of the Gloop CAPS organization, to move the vote of thanks. Marissa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the Guyana National Youth Council, Guyanese Women Roundtable, and other partners of this event, I must express our sincere gratitude to all the speakers this evening. Mr. Murphy David of the Guyana National Youth Council and Dr. Dawn Stewart of the Guyanese Women Roundtable for their introductory remarks. Mr. Darwin Humphrey, a big thank you for moderating the discussion forum. The segment has certainly been a success and timely. And of course, our guest speakers, presidential candidate of the APNU+AFC coalition, Brigadier David Granger, and member of the coalition, Ms. Cathy Hughes, for attending and delivering such an informative and well-received presentation, and thank you for answering the many questions by the audience. A big thank you to our chairwoman, Ms. Margaret Lawrence of the Guyanese Women Roundtable, for ensuring a smooth program. She has done an excellent job. Thank you, young Rael Stewart, who sang the national anthem with much vigor and patriotism in her heart. And thanks for joining in. It would be remiss of me to exclude our partners, the other partners who have assisted in the planning and coordination of this event. These are Caribbean People International Collective Incorporation, Blue Caps, Habitat for Humanity, Splash, SASOD, University of Guyana Student Society Association, Marondoi Inc., Youth Movement Guyana, and GRPA's Youth Advocacy Movement. Now, before I say good night, I would like to encourage all persons present here to vote like a boss. Why? Because you are a boss. If you are satisfied with the current state of your country, then vote. If you are not satisfied with the current state of your country, then vote. Either way, you have to vote. Exercise your franchise. Represent the power of the people. And to our politicians, we urge you all to keep it clean in your campaigns. We insist that the national elections process be kept clean and free of anything that does not promote racial harmony and encourages a culture of trust and honesty. We firmly believe that it is highly unethical and unnecessary to use destructive methods, racist or derogatory words and phrases in any campaign efforts. Let's all keep it clean, Guyana. It has been a great pleasure. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. And just some housekeeping notes. On Wednesday, we'll have a similar forum with the presidential and the prime ministerial candidates of the PPPC. And we also look forward to the debates organized by the Guyana National Council for Civil Society, led by Dr. Thomas. So lots more ahead. Thank you very much, and do have a wonderful evening.